Hey guys, my name is Jen from Criminally Curious, and I am back with you with another top list. This time I'm doing some book recommendations for Salem in the spirit of true spooky season. So stay tuned because I have some great book recommendations for you. All right, so as you already know, I am an avid book reader, obviously, part of book club. I read a lot, and so I thought I would do a segment of some books in lieu of spooky season here in October, Halloween coming up, and just coming off of our trip to Salem, and some of my favorite books so far that I've read. So starting off strong, I have a book here. It's called A Season with the Witch by J.W. Ocker. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I am not. The Magic and Mayhem of Halloween in Salem, Massachusetts. So this book I've had for a couple years. I've actually read it, I think 2 or 3 years ago. I am going to read it again because now that I've been in Salem and he talks about Salem, I think it'll make more sense to me, but I'm definitely going to read this book again. In the book, the author talks about moving his family of 4 to Salem, Massachusetts, downtown for spooky season for the month of October. And so in this book, he covers a lot. He does cover the history of Salem. He talks about the haunted happenings during the month of October. And he has interviews with some shop owners, which was really cool. If I remember correctly, he did kind of talk to them about, Halloween and how they feel living in Salem, and of course the history of Salem as well. He does touch on the history of Salem. He touches on some historical sites in Salem that we all know, like the Witch House, Proctor's Ledge, the Charter Street Cemetery, the Witch Memorial. So he does talk about that in his book. And he also includes pictures, which again, I always like it when they do have a picture of a historical site to kind of give you some reference. So that was the Hocus Pocus house, of course, that you can see there. But it's basically about his experience with his family living in Salem, in downtown Salem, in the month of October, and talking about the history, talking about the shop owners, how they feel about the town, the whole history. Very, very interesting read. I highly recommend this one if you are interested in Salem, or if you have even been to Salem already. It's definitely worth the read. Like I said, I am going to read it again since I had just gone to Salem, and I think a lot of his references in here in terms of streets and locations will make a lot more sense to me because now I have the area in my head. So A Season with the Witch, The Magic and Mayhem of Halloween in Salem, Massachusetts by J.W. Ocker. Highly recommend if you have not read this book already. All right, I have read quite a few books about the witch Salem trials and the witch hysteria during 1692. And there's a lot of books out there. Some of them are better than others. And you guys, I think I have found so far up to this point, my favorite book about the Salem Witch Trials of 1692, and that is called The Witches, Suspicion, Betrayal, and Hysteria in 1692 Salem by Stacy Schiff. I highly recommend this book. A lot of books that I've read about the witch trials in Salem kind of read like history book, very stale, just very factual, and to me the narrative doesn't flow. This one was an easy read. It is kind of a longer book, you can kind of see there, but it flows, and it was very well done by the author, describing the hysteria at the time, talking about the major players during that witch hysteria that happened, and it was easier to read. It wasn't boring, and it wasn't like a history textbook. It had a flow to it, a narrative to it. Talking about Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, Elizabeth Proctor, George Jacobs, a lot of Bridget Bishop, the victims and the judges, the major players during that time. Very, very good. I don't want to say synopsis, but very good account of what happened during that time. I highly, highly recommend this book. Like I said, it's probably my favorite so far about the Salem Witch Trials. So if you have not read this book, I highly, highly recommend it. You will not be disappointed by this one. Okay, so the next two books I have for you on my list, I just started to read one of them. Now, they did come highly recommended on YouTube, and so when I was in Salem, I happened to find them and I picked them up. The first one is called The Devil in the Shape of a Woman, Witchcraft in Colonial New England by Karlsen. And I did start to read this one. I'm about halfway through. So far, I'm finding this book very, very interesting. It's very different. It does give you the history of Salem, of leading up to the hysteria of the witches in Salem, but it also talks a little bit about the witch hysteria that obviously originated in Europe. A lot of people forget that Salem was not the only place in America that had witch trials, but in Europe, it was many, many years before 1692 had a witch hysteria over there. So the author does talk about that, and also a witch hysteria that happened here in America before Salem. Like I said, Salem was not the only place in New England that had witch trials. And so I thought the author did a great job of explaining that, kind of going over the history of that. Again, Connecticut was the first place that really had witch trials in America, and then Salem would have been the second place. So I think a lot of people forget about that or don't even know about that. What is also interesting about this book is she does give the history of the witch trials, but she also goes into more of a socio-economic point of view of what kind of person would have been most likely to be accused as a witch during this time, depending on your social status, depending on how much property you had, depending on your economic situation, whether you were married, not married, if you had brothers or sisters, or if you had children, if you only had daughters or no sons, or if you only had sons and no daughters. So kind of going into that aspect, which I think is fascinating, because according to this book, I probably would have been accused during that time. So, and I'm proud of it too. So I think that aspect was really, really very interesting to me when she starts to talk about that aspect of the witch trials. Halfway through, like I said, I have not finished this book yet, but I am liking it. I shouldn't really say enjoying it, because it's not really enjoyment to read about what happened to all those innocent people in 1692 and even before that. But it is very informational, very interesting read. From a historical point of view. So I am really liking reading this book, and I look forward to finishing it. But The Devil in the Shape of a Woman, Witchcraft in Colonial New England by Karlsen. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. All right, this next book is another one that I picked up in Salem that came highly recommended, like I said. This one is called 6 Women of Salem, The Untold Story of the Accused and Their Accusers in the Salem Witch Trials. This is by Marilynne Roach. And this is what the book looks like. I've not started this one because I have reading The Devil in the Shape of the Woman, the book that I just showed you before this. So I have actually not started this one yet, but it came highly recommended. And again, I'm reading for the history. This book does talk about the trials between February 1692 and May 1693. May 1693 being the end of the witch trials, basically. It did not, the witch trials did not really last that long, even though it was a horrible, horrible time. And we'll get into that in another video. But this book does talk about that hysteria, about the history of it, and talking about some of the circumstances of some of the victims during that time. So I am looking forward to reading this one. Again, to be honest, I have not started it yet, but came highly recommended, and I am always on the lookout for a new book to read about the Salem Witch Trials. So that's that one. All right, you guys, and for my last book recommendation, you cannot talk about Salem without talking about The Crucible, of course, right? I'm talking about The Crucible by Arthur Miller, this play, which was about Salem, Massachusetts, 1692, about the witch trials. Many of you, I'm sure, know of this. Some of you may not. For those of you who do not, I highly recommend. It's very short. You can read it in one sitting. It's a play. It's written in a play-like format, so Act 1, Act 2, talking about many of the people that lived during that time. Now, he did take some liberty with some of the characters in the book that were actually named after the actual victims, but he did take some leeway with that. But it talks about that time period, and in particular John Proctor and Elizabeth Proctor. But it also talks about Giles Quarry, talks about the Reverend Paris. And it's written in that stage format, I guess you could say, with Act 1, Act 2 having the characters' lines, so it does not read like an actual book, which might be a turnoff for some people. But talking about here, just happened talking about Abigail Williams, but he did take some not as historically accurate, let's just say, but the feeling is there about the mass hysteria that happened in 1692. And for those of you who have read this before, you'll know that this was actually a commentary by Arthur Miller, not on the Salem Witch Trials, but during the 1950s with the communists, right? The Red Scare. And so it's actually a comment on that, but he used Salem, Massachusetts as a background, and reflecting on the similarities between the witch trials and what was going on in the 1950s with the government and such. We won't get into that, but of course, you cannot talk about Salem without talking about The Crucible, and I've read this one many times, and so I highly suggest it. Again, it's not very long. All right, you guys, so those were some of my spooky season recommendation reads, having ties to Salem, Massachusetts. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Leave me a comment if you have read any of those books before, or if you have any book recommendations for us to check out. Let us know. So as always, thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment this channel, this video with others. We would greatly appreciate it. So until next time, stay criminally curious.